Welcome, everyone. It's so nice to see you all. Welcome to our new virtual talk series called Bahá'í Faith Modern Perspectives. Each Saturday, we will have a speaker from the Bahá'í Faith share his or her perspective on a topic of modern significance. After the talk, there'll be time for a Q&A portion. These sessions will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel, which is also called Bahá'í Faith Modern Perspectives, and you can subscribe to this channel for free so that you can watch and share all of the talks at your convenience. Today, we're going to start off with a short video followed by a reading from the Bahá'í Faith.
Be as a lamp shining forth with the light of the virtues of the world of humanity. Be as a lamp shining forth with the light of the world of humanity. Be a
This is the day in which God's most excellent favors have been poured out upon men, the day in which his most mighty grace hath been infused into all created things. It is incumbent upon all the peoples of the world to reconcile their differences and, with perfect unity and peace, abide beneath the shadow of the tree of his care and loving kindness. It behooveth them to cleave to whatsoever will in this day be conducive to their exaltation of their stations and to the promotion of their best interests. Happy are those who the all-glorious pen was moved to remember, and blessed are those men whose names, by virtue of our inscrutable decree, we have preferred to conceal. Beseech ye the one true God to grant that all men may be graciously assisted to fulfill that which is acceptable in our sight. Soon will the present day order be rolled up and a new one spread out in its stead. Verily, thy Lord speaketh the truth and is the knower of things unseen. Baha'u'llah.
Thank you so much. So today's speaker is Masud Olufani, and he'll be speaking on the stony and glorious path towards oneness. Masud Ashley Olufani is an Atlanta-based actor, mixed media artist, and writer whose studio practice is rooted in the discipline of sculpture. He's a graduate of Morehouse College and the Savannah College of Art and Design, where he earned an MFA in sculpture in 2013. Masud has exhibited his work in group and solo shows nationally and internationally. He's completed residencies at the Vermont Studio Center, the Cambridge Center for Arts and Sciences, and Creative Currents in Portobello, Panama. He's a 2020 South Arts Cross-Sector Grant recipient for Elder, a site-specific installation created to coincide with the redevelopment of the historic David T. Howard School in Atlanta. Masud is a 2018 Southern Arts Prize State Fellow, a recipient of a 2015 and 2018 IDEA Capital Grant, a Southwest Airlines Art and Social Engagement Grant, and a recipient of 2015 to 2016 Museum of Contemporary Art of Georgia Working Artist Project Grant. He's the creative director of Blocked, a global healing project, a multimedia performance created to memorialize spaces marked by the trauma of the transatlantic slave trade. As an actor, he had a recurring role on the series The Quad and has appeared in numerous television shows, including Greenleaf, Being Mary Jane, Devious Maids, Satisfaction, and Nashville. He's a featured actor in the film biopic All Eyes on Me. He's the co-host of the PBS News-based investigative journalism show Retro Report, premiering nationally in the fall of 2019. As a writer, Masud has published articles for Burnaway, Baha'i Teachings, and is a featured contributor for the Jacob Lawrence Struggle Series catalog, produced to coincide with a major exhibition of the Struggle Series paintings. And with that, I'd like to introduce Masud.
Oh, hello, everyone. It's wonderful to see all of these beautiful faces. I can think of worse ways to start my Saturday, and so I'm feeling pretty good right now. Really honored to be here, to be spending a little bit of time with you. I know that all of you could have chosen to do something different with your time. So I want to thank you, first of all, for giving me just a little bit of time to spend with you. I'd like to start, first of all, by just giving you a disclaimer or two. For those of you who are Baha'is, what I'm about to say will be familiar. For those of you who aren't Baha'is, it'll be informative for you. But I am not an authoritative interpreter of the Baha'i Faith. I'm not a clergyman of the Baha'i Faith. We have no clergy in the Baha'i Faith. I'm simply someone trying to follow the Baha'i path, sometimes doing it with a certain amount of grace and dignity, sometimes falling on my face. And what I share with you is just really one person's perspective on their life as a Baha'i. You know, I thought about what I would share with you, and I was thinking about how to kind of frame the discussion within the context of some things that are going on in the world right now. As was stated earlier, I'm a multidisciplinary artist, who kind of works across the visual arts as well as the performative arts. So my language and my way of understanding the world is in many ways through metaphor, allegory, and through storytelling. And, you know, I was thinking about where we are right now at this moment and how my practice as a creative artist and as a Baha'i, an artist informed by the teachings of Baha'u'llah, are trying to address and provide some context for what's going on right now in the present moment. And for me, what I am, like many of you, I've been thinking about a lot of things. I've thought about what's going on with the COVID-19 disease and the pandemic and how we're responding to that, how so many people are suffering as a result of it, how we've had to amend and change the way that we move in public spaces, how we've had to reconfigure how we maintain social connection with one another, quite often over platforms like this, Zoom or other platforms. So that's been on my mind. And then perhaps most especially for me has been the issue of race and where we are in our contemporary moment in America regarding the issue of race. The Baha'i Faith says that the issue of racism in America is America's most challenging and vital issue. It's vital, signifying its importance or the preeminence that it should take in terms of our list of concerns, and challenging because of the conundrum, the difficulty it is to arrest its spread and also to address the effects over multiple generations. And I started thinking about some of my own personal experiences, and I don't know about for you, but for me, a way that I can enter around issues that I find that makes them accessible for me is when somebody shares a personal story. And so what I'd like to do is to begin with sharing a personal story that for me was formative around the issue of race. And it occurred when I was about 7 years old. Like all children, I was playful and you know, like to have fun and play with my friends and do the other things that kids do. And one summer, I think I was about in my second grade year of school, my father had it in his mind that I would spend my summer vacation taking a cross-country road trip to California to visit family in Southern and Northern California. And as inspired and exciting as this, I'm sure you can imagine this trip was for me, when I would much rather preferred being swimming, you know, or going to the beach with my friends in Miami, Florida. My father, nevertheless, packed me in the car with a stack of comic books, and we began a 2-week journey across the country to California. We were living in Miami, Florida at the time. We got out with a few, you know, hiccups on the road trip. We got out to California, spent a wonderful time with my family. I actually was happy that I went after seeing my family. And my father, at some point, needed to get back home so he could go back to work. So we piled back in the car, and we're traveling back towards Miami from Los Angeles, California. After a couple of days on the road, we were crossing the state line into Mississippi. And it was late one night. It must have been about 11 or 11:30 in the evening time. I was too young to drive, of course, and my father was very tired, and I can tell that he was falling asleep at the wheel. And each time that he dozed off, I would wake him up. Finally, he decided that after trying to stay awake, that we should stop at the nearest rest stop and get some sleep, which we did. I don't remember what time it was. We had dozed off to sleep, and I was sleeping very soundly. But early in the morning, I felt the car shake. And I opened my eyes to see 6 white men standing around the car, rocking the body of the car violently. My father woke up, and he could see that I was upset and a little frightened, I think. And he saw these men as well. I began to cry because I didn't know what was going to happen. And I told my father that I needed to use the restroom. My father opened his driver's side door without a hesitation and walked over to my side and grabbed me by the hand and walked me towards these men. Now, I didn't know what was going to happen. I had no idea. I wasn't even that clear about why I was so afraid. I had heard stories amongst my family about racial violence in the Deep South. My family was from South Carolina and from the island of St. Croix in the Caribbean, and also from Texas. So they had a number of stories of racial violence being visited upon friends or family members, but it was abstract to me. I hadn't had any personal interaction with it. So they were more like whispers or intimations of some things that happened, and I didn't pay them much attention. This was my first encounter with something that seemed so immediate and so real. My father walked me towards these men, and without hesitation, they parted like the Red Sea. And we went to the facilities and used them, and then came back and got in the car and continued on our way. Years later, remembering this story and remembering how I felt, I asked my father, I said, how did you feel, Dad, in that moment? Because your demeanor, the way you walked up to these men, there was no fear, there was no intimidation. You just walked right through them, and we did what we had to do, and we left. And without hesitation, he said, I was afraid. And it was very instructive to me to hear him say that, because it was an example, a very profound example in my life of how courage is not necessarily the absence of fear, but the ability to move in spite of fear. So I thought about that experience as I was looking at the brutal killing of George Floyd, as I was watching the other murders that occurred in plain sight and were caught on video. I saw the subsequent protest movement. And I was deeply moved and obviously concerned, like many of us were, about the state of racial affairs in this country. I, in college, went to a school called Morehouse College here in Atlanta, Georgia, which is right down the street from where I live, actually. And Morehouse College's most illustrious graduate was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And I remember growing up and listening to his speeches as a boy and being transfixed by the melody, the beautiful linguistic quality, the way that he could fuse language with profound philosophical and spiritual teachings and move you in a very deep way. And I was thinking of Dr. King. I was thinking of Malcolm X. I was thinking about Fannie Lou Hamer. I was thinking about Mahalia Jackson. I was thinking about my enslaved ancestors on both my mother and my father's side, as I was watching this country descend into the chaos of bigotry and injustice, and realizing that we, in many ways, the present condition is tied very much to what has happened previously throughout the history of this country. I could see the connection between the history of slavery, the history of Jim Crow, the history of segregated housing and hiring practices, the history of convict leasing, the history of lynching, and how all of those things had led up to the moment that we find ourselves in. And I must confess, for a moment, I was racked with a deep sense of anger and despair and sadness, a kind of sadness that felt in many ways ancient and deeply rooted, ancestral in some ways. And I think even for a moment, I was tempted to go out to the streets and to express myself in some way that I think in the wake of it, I would not have been ultimately proud of. And maybe for a moment, I felt a tinge of hopelessness, a kind of aching sense of futility. And then I pulled back and reflected on the teachings of Baha'u'llah, and the fact that this faith has as its premise, as its core principle, the oneness of mankind, that all the other principles, the equality of women and men, the universal education of everybody on the planet, the independent investigation of truth, the harmony of science and religion, all of those things revolve around this core principle. And then I thought about that it's not enough just to believe in that principle in the context of the Baha'i faith. It's not merely about a theoretical supposition. It's about the understanding that this is a living, breathing reality, as real as life itself, and that our behavior and our conduct should reflect our commitment and our conviction to this core principle. I thought about the friendships that I had built over the years across cultural lines, the fact that my dearest friend is a brother from Scotland, a true Scot who has a kilt and a sporran. We've been friends for some 30 years now. And I thought about the sincerity of his love and his commitment, the fact that we have engaged around difficult conversations throughout our time together, and we've come out on the other side, even though sometimes we have argued, we have wrestled with, we have disagreed, but we have stayed committed and true to the love that exists between us. I thought about my great-great-great-grandfather, a man named John Jones, who picked cotton on the cotton fields of South Carolina, who married a white woman, an Irish woman, who we came to know as Queenie. They could not stay together in the Deep South, so they moved to Philadelphia to be together. He died at 110 and had spent most of his life as an enslaved African. I thought about the commitment and the love that must have existed between them to buck a system, to stand up against the incredible forces that were arrayed against them and say that, no, this is our reality, this is what we choose, and we will deal with the consequences as they come. I thought about seeing my mother and my father struggle against the realities of racism. I remember as a child going to Disney World with my mother. Every year for my birthday, my parents would take me to Disney World. We lived in Miami, Florida at the time. And I remember my mother, we were standing on line to wait to get into some ride I cannot now remember, and a white woman cut in front of us. And my mother let her know in no uncertain terms that we existed, we were here, you will see us. I thought about my father growing up in a small town in central Texas, living on the black side of town, living in a neighborhood that was designated a black area without indoor plumbing, without indoor water, having to use an outhouse. I thought of him shining shoes in a white barber shop in downtown Dallas. I thought of the story that he told me about a white man coming in. My father was shining his shoes, and this white man looked at him and said, "Nigga, I like the way you pop that rag." I thought of my own experiences with race, being called a nigger on the playground, being teased about the curl of my hair, the shape of my lips, the size of my nose, how I used to fight, because that was the only response I can think of at the time, and how I couldn't understand this bewildering dimension and fixation on one aspect of my being, which was the color of my skin. In 1992, as a freshman at Morehouse College, I was seeing a woman at Spelman College, a talented and gifted actress named Batima Tanae Cochran. At the time, I thought that I might become a priest. You see, at that point, I had begun this deep dive into spiritual reality. My life seemed, I was looking for some type of meaning. And I had settled on becoming an Episcopalian priest because Episcopalian priests could get married, and that was very important to me. And this young woman I was seeing had a dear friend on campus at Spelman College, a woman by the name of Jamila Kennedy, who's a very committed and devoted Baha'i here in Atlanta, Georgia. And she went to her one day and she said, "I'm seeing this guy, I like him. He wants to be a priest, but he's not a priest, but I think he might like the Baha'i faith." And I remember how suspicious I was about hearing about the Baha'i faith because I'd never heard about Baha'u'llah, the Baha'i teachings. And of course, if it didn't exist in my life, if I hadn't heard about it, it must not be real. And I began my investigation into the Baha'i faith with the thought that I was going to prove this community wrong, that these people were crazy, that they were misguided and confused. And then I was given a prayer book with the prayers of Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, in them. And I made the mistake of opening up the book one day. And I opened up and I read some of the most beautiful words I had ever heard in my life. And I remember the feeling that I got, which was very much the same feeling that I got when I read the Beatitudes, when I read the parables in the Bible, when I read the teachings of Prophet Muhammad in the Quran, when I read the Buddhist texts, when I read the Bhagavad Gita, when I read all of these holy books that seemed to pluck something deep in my soul, some essential, some elemental chord within me reverberated. And I had to eventually admit that I was wrong and that this was true. And I remember looking at the teachings in the faith. I remember seeing the equality of women and men, independent investigation of the truth. What? You mean I actually have reason, and in this faith I am allowed to use reason to investigate reality for myself? That is not only something that is stated, but it is my responsibility to do so, that I can't rely on my parents to discern what is truth or falsehood for myself. I have to figure that out for myself. That was very profound for me. I remember the harmony of science and religion. Science and religion are not mutually exclusive. They are interdependent. And then I stumbled on the principle of the oneness of mankind. And given the history of my interface with racism, the history of the legacy of bigotry and injustice in my family, it resonated very deeply for me. But at that moment, it was just merely a poetic abstraction. You see, I had to see it practiced in reality for me to feel that this was true in the Baha'i community as well. And so gradually I started attending Baha'i gatherings. I started meeting friends from a variety of different backgrounds. And to be clear, Baha'is aren't perfect. We struggle with the issue of race, the issue of learning how to negotiate the complexity of culture. But we are held together, we are knit together, stitched together in this garment by the transcendent teachings of Baha'u'llah. These writings that tell us that the earth is one country and mankind are its citizens. These writings that say to us, know you not why I created you all from one same substance, that no man should exalt himself above another. Ponder this. Ponder this. The beautiful teaching from the guardian of the Baha'i Faith, Shoghi Effendi, who said, essentially, in one of the most profound writings that I've read in his teachings, where he says essentially that in every human being is a sign of God's reflected glory. That means that every person that I come across, whether or not they rub me the right way or rub me the wrong way, that something in that person is a reflection of God's creative hand, a sign of his reflected glory. That in essence, that our primary identity, how we have all been created, is spiritual in nature. It transcends color, it transcends culture, it transcends neighborhood or gender. It is the glue, if you will, that binds humanity together. And that all of the secondary identities that we identify ourselves with, that we describe ourselves by, I am a black man, I am a proud black man, I love my culture, I love the expressiveness of my culture, but my primary identity supersedes my secondary identity. Now, at the same time, that doesn't mean that there aren't real world implications and consequences that coincide with my secondary identity. I don't negate that. I embrace that. I understand that. But first and foremost, my primary identity is spiritual in nature. In many ways, it's like listening to a great piece of music. I'm a jazz head. I love jazz, grew up on jazz. I'm thinking of John Coltrane's Love Supreme and that melodic tempo that is set by John Coltrane. As these brothers, the bassist sets this really beautiful tempo, and then you have all these other musicians that are dancing off of this theme. They're improvising, but that central theme holds them together. It is the binding glue that keeps the composition together. And in many ways, humanity, I think, can be seen as variations on a theme. That primary identity is what unites us. But then you have Black folk, you got white folk, you got Latino folk, you got Asian folks, you got Native Americans, and all these beautiful cultures are improving off of this core central theme. And so for me, that understanding, coming to that understanding, which is something that I'm still internalizing and realizing every day. It's a constant and consistent work and struggle to keep that in mind as I'm dealing with the issue of race, as I'm looking on television and seeing how Black people are continually oppressed and repressed. I'm looking at my Native American brothers and sisters who have continuously suffered under a system of subjugation and oppression. As I'm looking how my Asian brothers who are designated as the bringers of the COVID flu are being discriminated against. As I'm looking at all of these marginalized groups, what keeps me centered and focused are those transcendent teachings of Baha'u'llah. That in a very real way, we are all linked. As Dr. King say, caught, bound together by some powerful force. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied together forever in a single garment of destiny. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And for some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. No man is an island unto himself, each man a piece of the continent, a part of the whole. And then he goes on towards the end to say, any man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Therefore never seek to know for whom that bell tolls. It tolls for thee. I remember when I was a teenager and I was living in Far Rockaway, Queens, I used to take the train every day from Far Rockaway to go to school in Newark, New Jersey, because it was the only arts high school that would accept me living outside of the district. That train ride literally was 90 minutes, 1 hour and a half going and coming. This was long before, I'm gonna date myself here just a little bit, but bear with me, okay? This is long before iPads or iPhones. This is long before any of that technology. You had a few choices. You had a Walkman, you had a book, you fell asleep, or you watched folk. And it was on that long train ride that I started to develop a love for reading. And I remember my mother had this shelf full of books, and she had all these amazing Black writers, which I wasn't being exposed to in school, right? People like Jamaica Kincaid, James Baldwin, people like Richard Wright, Langston Hughes, people like Zora Neale Hurston, and so forth and so on. And she also had Shakespeare. And I remember picking up a book from Shakespeare, I think it was Hamlet. And I was reading, I would spend my time on the train because I was bored reading, not because I had some innate love for reading, but because I was bored and chose to do this process of reading, I developed a love for reading over time. I was reading in Hamlet and I came across this phrase in Hamlet that just shook me to my core, where Hamlet is perplexed about the nature of man. And he says, what a piece of work is a man in form and faculty, how noble. In apprehension, how like an angel. In comprehension, how like a god. The paragon of the worlds, the beauty of the animals, and yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? So Hamlet is posing a question here. Shakespeare is using Hamlet to pose this question. And he's saying, I don't understand the complexity of humanity, how humanity is made, the substance from which he is made. It is a mystery to me. All of these contradictions inherent in humanity. And I can hear, as I learned about Baha'u'llah, I could hear this kind of mystical conversation between Baha'u'llah, the Blessed Perfection, the glory of God in this day, having this conversation with Shakespeare, Shakespeare posing this question, and Baha'u'llah says, I created you all from one same substance. From one same substance. He's answering Hamlet. He's clarifying how we have been created. My engagement with art, with creativity, as a person who likes to contextualize human experience that way, is in some way trying to answer that question. Much of my work deals with issues like racism, social stratification, the soul's aspiration for transcendence, the complexity of human experience. And as I'm in this moment and I'm dealing with, in my own way, trying to grapple and work my way through the complexity of the racialized moment that we're in, grounded in the teachings of the Baha'i Faith, understanding that my primary identity is spiritual, but my secondary identity has real world implications that I have to grapple with. Recognizing also that I have a sincere part to play in the establishment of the oneness of mankind, that I can't be a bystander who just regurgitates flowery sayings, but I have to get my hands dirty in the soil. I have to bend my back. I have to pluck weeds. I have to plant seeds. I have to be engaged in this work about the oneness of mankind. And my work as an artist, whether it is as a visual artist, as an actor, as a performer, what have you, as a writer, all seems to naturally be centered around those kinds of considerations. So I find myself in this interesting space right now as a person deeply concerned about the moment that we're in, identifying, understanding that on one hand, I have dealt with this anger, this sadness, this sense of despair. It's sometimes this sense of almost hopelessness. But then on the other hand, I also recognize, based on the teachings of the Baha'i Faith, that there are two processes taking place in the world right now. There is one that is destructive, which is about this old world order that ultimately is coming down because these old structures that we have relied on for answers are failing us fundamentally. And then this constructive force, which is about building something new. A new civilization that is based on justice and equality, a civilization that does not tolerate injustice and inequality, that has as its core foundation the oneness of mankind as the core principle and justice as the safeguard. So I am, in some ways, find myself dealing on the one hand with the sadness for the suffering, but also aware that in some sense, this process that we're going through is inevitable and that the old has to crumble to clear way for what is coming in its wake. And for me, art, creativity is a way of staying in that place of hope, that place of certainty, that place of where I can have an avenue to give release to these destructive feelings that I'm having. And I can take that base material, right? That discarded debris, that detritus, and turn it into something constructive. The Baha'i Faith says that all of the revelations of God come from God, so that there is no conflict truly between a Baha'i, a Muslim, a Christian, a Buddhist, a Jew, a Zoroastrian, and so forth and so on. That in essence, that the revelation of God is, God's revelation has been with humanity since humanity has been here. It has come to us at different times through different messengers. And that in some sense, the messengers of God are like divine physicians sent to humanity at a given point in time to diagnose the ailment of the body politic and then to prescribe the remedy. In this day and time, Baha'u'llah says the oneness of mankind is the core principle around which all the other principles of this divine revelation revolve. And so in some sense, Baha'u'llah, in that, thinking about that construct, is this physician, the body politic of humanity is laying on a table. He's looking at the different parts of the body. He's looking at the feet, he's looking at the legs, he's looking at the organs, and he says, in this day and time, the ailment that has to be solved and remedied, first above all else, is the sickness of alienation, of prejudice and bigotry, and injustice. And so that is the core driving principle of this beloved faith. And because of that, That's where I draw my inspiration and my hope out of in everything that I do. I also draw my inspiration and my hope out of the designation of people of African descent in the Baha'i faith. The only time in the history of religious truth that a messenger of God has spoken directly to people of African descent when he says, "Thou art like the pupil of the eye, the very source of light. And the eye cannot see without the pupil." In essence, light enters the eye through the apparatus of the pupil. So whenever I'm struggling and I feel like somebody says something that might slight me in terms of my secondary identity, they might say something that is slightly defaming about people of African descent. I might look on the TV and see examples of bigotry and injustice, public lynchings, what have you, and I might for a moment feel negative about my place in the world. I go back to that teaching. Masud, you are as the pupil of the eye, and the light enters the eye through the pupil. In essence, it doesn't matter what anybody else says about me. It doesn't matter how society conscribes or confines my potential. That teaching galvanizes me, reinforces me, and reminds me of my spiritual destiny. The other profound thing about this teaching, which is so incredibly beautiful, is that it's not because Black people are inherently better than anybody else. It's not like we enter the world with some strand of DNA that says you are the pupil of the eye because you are better. In essence, it's because of our suffering and the constructive resilience with which we had to respond to the challenges that face our community that gives us that distinction. I was thinking about this the other day, and I was thinking about the intrinsic relationship between the white and the Black community here in America. And something came to me, which I don't think I'd ever thought about before. Something very profound that moved me in a way that I hadn't anticipated. But I realized that there is an intrinsic relationship between the white and the Black community, that these two communities are interdependent. That in a real sense, some of our sick white brothers and sisters who have upheld and reinforced the system of white supremacy, that their salvation is inextricably tied to the salvation of people of African descent. As the great writer James Baldwin once said when he was asked about Black people, about white people saving Black people. And he said, it's not a matter of saving the natives, it's a matter of saving oneself. And so I think about that spiritual designation of us being the pupil of the eye and the light source being very closely related to the truth. Those two things are bound together. You can't have truth without light. Light brings the truth. There is an inextricable link there, right? And so in a sense, African Americans in this cultural context in the West, in America, are bringing the light of truth to America. That's our spiritual distinction. Again, not because anything exceptional, inherently exceptional or better about people of African descent, but rather because as a recompense for the suffering that we have endured and the constructive resilience that we've had to employ to respond to it, that is the bestowal and the gift of this revelation. I'm gonna shut up for a moment. And I thought I would turn my attention, how's everybody doing? I know I can talk sometimes and I apologize, but these issues are passionate for me. And so sometimes I can have a tendency to go there, but I wanted to share, I thought it'd be good if I shared some of the work that I've been engaged in recently in terms of being a visual artist. And I thought that you all might enjoy that. If you don't enjoy it, I apologize, but I thought it might be a good time to share some of that. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and I will talk about some of these things for a few moments, and then we can enter into hopefully some discussion and questions and and reflections and so forth and so on. I'm just going to burn through a few of these very quickly, because otherwise we could be here for a while, and I don't want to ask more of you than you can give today. So my work as a visual artist deals with, again, issues of justice and injustice, social stratification, and other issues. I'll just go through a few pieces for you. This piece is titled Pipeline. It deals with the whole idea of the school to prison pipeline. Some of you may be very, very familiar with this concept, but it is an understanding, it's a concept that was put forth to relate or to kind of frame the role that some aspects of the school system have played in the incarceration, the disproportionate incarceration of Black and brown men. The school is defined as a school to prison pipeline. So what I've done here is kind of create a sculptural kind of construct that hopefully speaks to that. As you see, this dictionary is open and the phrase pipeline is circled there. A pair of black hands that I cast from a 7-year-old child, which have been bound by a set of handcuffs. And then this pipeline, which of course is a literal reference to pipeline. So I'm going to show you, this is another piece I did called Hive, which deals with the disproportionate rate that Black and brown people are killed by the police. This hive form that you see, which is here, is a symbol of community and connection. There are clusters of about 300 bees around this hive. And then there's a sound device on the inside that plays the sound of a beehive, which is a symbol of community for me, which eventually dissolves, and then this kind of choral arrangement of this Negro spiritual from this one-room Baptist church in Alabama rises to blend with the beehive sound. So it's kind of hard to distinguish where the beehive sounds begin and the sounds of the choir end. Silk screened on these leaf forms are the images of people who have been murdered by police, Tamir Rice, and some others. Let's see, I think I'll do one other piece, and then I'll talk about the public artwork that I just did, and then we can enter into some discussion. This is a piece titled Tight Packers, again, which is about the prison industrial complex. This is a series of 100 sardine cans with drawings of African-American men placed within them. And then inscribed on the lids of the cans are prison identification numbers. I was linking what I was thinking about in doing this piece was the connection between the slavery system and mass incarceration. At the heart of the piece is a class graduation photo with the silhouettes of missing people who would have been in that photo, which in some sense possibly could have been some of these young men. And I was interested in the loss of potential and how quite oftentimes we're so flagrantly careless with our most precious resource, which is our young people, and particularly as it pertains to Black and brown men and women. I would like to, I'll just talk about this quick public art piece that was mentioned in the introduction. This is a piece called Elder, which honors the David T. Howard School, which is here in Atlanta. David T. Howard was a formerly enslaved African who, after the end of slavery came in 1865, or that's what the history books say. I have a bit of an argument with that, but nevertheless. He worked as an undertaker and was able to save some money. And he took the money that he saved and purchased a parcel of land. And on that land, he built a school, which it eventually would become the David T. Howard School, which would be one of only 2 high schools in the city of Atlanta that would educate Black students during the time of segregation. What I did here was to take the carcass of one of the old growth elm trees that had been on the site of the David T. Howard School for like 150 years, and I used it as a conceptual anchor and a physical anchor for the sculpture itself. So it's turned on its side like a dead carcass. And then I built a series of limbs, and what we did was to collect members of the original graduating class of David T. Howard, and we made castings of their hands. And I turned their hands into branches that look like they're growing and shooting off the trunk of the tree. The oldest being a woman who is 92 years of age, who was in the original 1948 graduating class. And she's just an amazing, amazing woman. Few different views. And what I can do, the last thing I'll show you is just a quick aerial kind of video footage so you can take a look at what it looks like. And here you go. And see its orientation towards the David T. Howard School, because it's pointing in the direction of the school across the street, which is going under a major revitalization. So that's the David T. Howard School there, with the parts that have been added on. The red brick part is the original school itself. And this tree used to exist on the grounds of that school. All right, friends, I hope that was helpful. I hope that wasn't too much to ask of you.